All right, brother. So probably one thing that I want to talk about, one thing I want to get off at the beginning of this interview, at the beginning of this conversation, not how many years you've been doing this, not what your experiences are like, but the wrestling cosplays, man. That's what I want to talk about, dude. Because you sent me the picture of you in Tiger Mask. You have Ultimo Drago. You have a really good Stone Cold Steve Austin one, man. Where does the love for wrestling come from?
Um, to be perfectly honest, I grew up in the 80s. So I was probably about 4 or 5 years old when the first WrestleMania happened. So that was in like the golden age of professional wrestling. So I grew up, I was a Hulkamaniac. I loved the Ultimate Warrior, and then all those big names from the WWF, the Jake the Snakes, the Nasty Boys, Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, and I watched it. I kind of went away from it for a little while when there was a little bit of a lull. But then when it was the whole Monday Night Wars and the Attitude Era and all that, that was pretty much my childhood. So, and I always enjoy having the conversation with people that don't get it, which I've always found fascinating. It's like, oh, how can you watch wrestling? That stuff's fake. Which I always just responded with. My brother was the worst about it when I was in high school. I'm like, so is Jean Claude Van Damme really killing people?
You have the same mentality I do, man. That's usually what I say to people is like, "Oh, but Tony Stark's real." I mean, Robert Downey Jr. is Tony Stark, but Tony Stark in general is real. Is
Yeah,
usually what I tell people.
yeah, and it's entertainment. It is what it is. It's just got that. It's got that athletic component to it that, for whatever reason, people want to crap on it. And a buddy of mine, who's a diehard wrestling fan, shout out to Rick McCully, um, who's a black belt in jiu-jitsu and one of my personal heroes in jiu-jitsu. Uh, he and I had a conversation about it years ago, saying like, I think more people watch wrestling than they want to admit. It's like their guilty pleasure. So I think a lot of people like to crap on it. Like the guys who like to talk about their, how much of a player they are, and really they don't have a girlfriend and haven't had one for 7 years. Like, okay, fine, wrestling's crap. I don't care. You can have your opinion.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with you, man. Speaking of wrestling wrestlers, fans, or competitors, I saw on your Instagram when I was going through is you actually got to take a picture with somebody who has been revitalizing professional wrestling as of late. You got to take a picture with Josh Barnett.
Yeah, I actually went to a 3-hour seminar with Josh Barnett for catch wrestling. Um, being I'm a black belt in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, and I've been training for 16 years. And all through my training, I've always kind of like been a little bit. I was always a nerd. I have an engineering degree, so I mean that's kind of like a prerequisite. That means you're a nerd. Um, being the nerd that I was, as I was coming up through the combat sports, I would go online and look at videos and see things. And it also kind of played into the whole pro wrestling thing, because that's one thing a lot of people don't know is all pro wrestling holds came from, which are quote unquote fake. They all came from real catch wrestling holds that do serious damage. Like if you put someone in a figure four leg lock and drive down with your legs, you essentially tear their knee apart. So I kind of always had like a an automatic love for catch wrestling because it directly tied to pro wrestling. And over the years, I looked out different, hip locks and neck cranks and everything else from catch wrestling. So when Josh Barnett was doing a seminar nearby, um, I signed up for it, and it was money well spent. I got a different perspective from it, and I foolishly or geniusly uh, agreed to be the demonstration guy because I was one of the biggest guys there, because I'm like 240 pounds. So I agreed to be the guy that he would smash all day, which I'll never forget that. it was a good learning experience. I know what a 270-pound catch wrestler feels like when he drops his weight through your ribs.
So let's talk about that also. Your experience. What made you choose jujitsu? And you're saying you've been doing it for about 16 years. Um, I recently got to do an interview with a professor here in my city. We got to do it at his academy, and that was a great experience of learning why he did it. And roughly about the same time as when you started, jujitsu was still barely getting up there. So what made you choose it?
So I'd obviously say that jujitsu, for people who don't know it, has a very heavy submission component. So I would say that it was indoctrinated in me at a young age because I was a fan of Roddy Piper, who had the sleeper hold, which is really a rear naked choke. I was a Bret Hart fan. And I liked watching some of the Japanese stuff that I saw that was very much heavy in catch wrestling. So that's when it was kind of ingrained into my neural network at a young age while it was still developing. But I actually picked up on it. It's a pretty entertaining story. I was hanging out with a friend of mine watching a UFC pay-per-view. At this point, it's probably like UFC 80, give or take. So it's going back like 16 years. And he was telling me that when he was in law school, he had spent time training and he had never really gotten a belt. But while we're sitting there watching the fights, I said a probably very American comment of, man, I wish I could learn this stuff. That'd be so cool, but there's nowhere near my house. My best friend, who is big time ball buster, breaks out his laptop, types it out, and says, "Oh, this is on the same road that you live on, and it looks like it's walking distance." So he kind of called me out on my bullshit. And so then I just called over to the gym, asked if I could sit on a class, went there and checked it out. And a week later, I tried a class, gave him a year's worth of dues in cash. And that was just the start of a 16-year journey that's still going on.
Uh, that's that. I like that. I like that your friend called you out on it and was like, "Yeah, no, we'll see if you actually try." I love that. Um, like what gets you excited about it? I know that you said the submission part and you growing up, but what keeps you going constantly? Because it's not something that's easy, especially for me who I'm still learning uh how to do it. And my background is amateur wrestling, so I got a lot of different things that are similar to amateur wrestling, but just in all it's still a whole new animal that I'm trying to learn. What keeps you going with it?
It's originally I wanted to do it just in general as I was already working out a lot, trying to get ready for triathlons. So I was swimming, biking, lifting, and so just getting into something active was fun for me. So to stay in good shape was part of it. But the other thing was for a self-defense aspect, and that's how it kind of all started. Was you see the early UFCs, and there's this small, average-looking guy who's like, that guy probably runs at the gym a little bit. Like that was Hoist Gracie, and he was just strangling these guys, and I'm like, I'm a pretty big guy. Like I don't want to be the guy on the receiving end of what I don't know what's going on, but I got beat up.
Mm-hmm.
And anyone who's done jujitsu and gone against the higher belt, and they're doing a playful game with you while you're rolling, and you get caught in a submission, and it goes from I was on top in a good position, and somehow he's on my back, and what the hell just happened? So it became intriguing to me in that aspect because I couldn't solve the puzzle. And it's a game. It's a chess match. It's something that even after 16 years of training, you would consider yourself somewhat of an expert. I have my black belt, but any black belt will tell you, if they're honest and they're not some type of a phenom, when you get to that black belt level, it's like you're starting over. So you could be a black belt who's had your black belt for a month, a week, a year, and you're going against somebody who's been at that pro level for 15 years. If you go to a tournament, you end up against them. You can't tell me 30 years experience doesn't trump 15 very quickly.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the appeal to me, is that I'm always learning things. 11 or 12 years into training, I learned a different way to finish a head and arm choke, and it was better than what I had already known. So you would think doing it for 10 years, and I had success with it. I'd submitted people in tournaments, but I found a more efficient way to do it. So if in 11 years you're going to learn something that you learned on day 6, how can you replace that? Because the knowledge just constantly flows, and we're always rediscovering ways to do something better.
I I like how calm and humble you are about, competing. I like the fact that you have competed. That's something that um I get excited when I see people compete, or when I see tournament videos or anything like that. I'm like, this is a whole different discipline. This is cool. One picture I did see on your Instagram, and I love how you don't take it serious, is you posted, if you're not first, you're last in a 2-man advanced division. I was like, well, he's not wrong there. Like, that's true. So I like it. I like it. You don't you don't seem like you take yourself too seriously, but you know what you need to do if you are ever in trouble.
Yeah, I mean, I would say if I'm anything, I'm like a 1960s version of the Joker. I wouldn't say I'm Heath Ledger. That's a terrifying person. Um, I wouldn't say I'm as funny or as cool as Jack Nicholson. But if you give me Romero back in the 60s, kind of a comic book, I like to make people laugh. And I know that I still compete a little bit, but I wouldn't say I'm an active competitor. I'm more of a teacher at this point, and I really like teaching basics to white belts. That's what I do at Gentleman's Jiu-Jitsu in Wilmington, Delaware. That's the school where I teach. I also teach at a Evolution Krav Maga in Malvern. I teach the groundwork there. So I enjoy teaching. That's kind of where I'm at in my journey for jiu-jitsu, and I may come back to competing. But right now, I'm more interested in preparing the next generation of jiu-jitsu competitors to go be competitors. Take people who are more the fun, like, hey, I'm just going to get out of the house, more the hobbyists. And when they show interest in becoming competitors, hey, I can get you there. I can teach you there. I can give you exercises to do at home. We're going to do live rounds. I'm going to tone down my skills while at the same time increasing my intensity to give you more of a white or a blue belt match that you're going to see. And I really enjoy teaching. I feel like as a black belt, it's your responsibility to pass the knowledge on to the next level, like the
Agreed.
next generation.
Agreed, 100%. And I have a lot of respect for that, because there are still some guys who don't want to do that, and it seems like a lot of the tournaments, at least from what I've gotten to see from, like I said, from videos and from people that I'm meeting who have been doing jujitsu for a while, is the tournaments seem a lot different, because you guys are always constantly giving each other pointers after different matches, or this, that, and the other. um as a teacher, this is something I like to ask you guys, is what do you see uh making jujitsu popular now? Because you have ADCC, which is huge because of Gordon Ryan, and you have one championship. Like, is it gi or no gi in your preference?
Well, I like to play with judo. So I've done judo tournaments as well. Only local ones. It's not like I was ever a big deal in judo. I'm not a big deal in jujitsu. Although I will tell you, I am on Gordon Ryan's Wikipedia page.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think I'm like the fourth guy he beat back when he was like a teenager. But he didn't finish his rear naked choke. It was more of a neck crank. And if you watch the video, I'm adjusting my jaw at the end. So yeah, I'm gonna say I'm like number 2 in the world then. I mean, that's where it comes from. He was on my back for like 4 minutes.
Okay. All right.
Like,
You created the beast. That's what it was. He couldn't get you, so that's why he got bigger.
There's a lot of guys that, you know, and I will say this with 100% honesty, I can play the whole, you know, I'll play the heel game of like, you're not really a legend until you beat me. But there are like some good guys that I'm like a defeat on their resume, and they took off afterwards. And I'm gonna be the first to say that was all coincidence. I am not as good as them. Eddie Cummings beat me. Mark Tarman beat me. I lost an arm wrestling match to Gary Tonin once. He may not remember it. He had a few adult beverages at the time. And Gordon Ryan. So I have these like, my accolades is losing to people who are really good, but I'm looking back going like, hey, I got to wrestle that guy. That was pretty cool. Josh Barnett beat me up for 3 hours. That was an experience.
You know how many just wrestling fans would kill to get the opportunity to get just one move, to get beat up by one move by Josh Barnett, and you got beat up for 3 hours. That still sounds awesome, no matter what.
Yeah, and the funny thing was that he was waiting for an Uber to go to the train station in Philly. So he's going from like Delaware up to Philly. And I was like, I'm going to pick up my girlfriend, now my fiance. I don't know how she puts up with me, but she's a saint. So I was like, I got to go pick her up from work and I'm, you know, I said it was not that far out of the way without actually checking the GPS. It added like an hour, but it wasn't a big deal. I gave him a ride to the train station. We talked about different pro wrestling stuff for like an hour.
Yeah, you're goated, my guy, in the IWC. You're goated right there, dude. But yeah, so like I said, what is your preference, gi or no gi?
I'm one of those guys who's like a 50-50. I'm like a weird combination. I really like judo, so I like the takedown game. But at the same time, in judo, over the years, they've removed a lot of things to make it more a faster pace, similar to like amateur wrestling, where you can't go backwards at all, you get penalized. Judo has similar rules where you can't extend the arms for too long. That's a Shido, a penalty. There's a whole bunch of anti-stalling. You have to stand up straight. Obviously, if you put your butt out and push forward, now you're being more of a defensive posture. You have 3 seconds to attack, and then you're stalling. So they have taken a lot of things out of it to make it more about the throw, which is the more entertaining aspect of it. So they don't have foot locks, but for a long time, I was a leg lock guy. My lineage was, like I said, Rob Mudrak was my instructor. His instructor was Rick McCulley, and Rick McCulley was a huge Dean Lister fan. That's going back to like the 90s, I think. So that was well before. I don't know exactly when Rick got started. He's just like what people view Gordon Ryan. That's how I view Rick now, or that's how I viewed Rick back then. Like he was a guy that was an Abu Dhabi veteran. You know, he'd had matches with like Janji, where I think he was 1-1. Glover Teixeira, he beat him in tournament. And I think Glover's still trying to get that back every now and then when he sees him. Hey, you want to compete today? I got my gi in the car. So they were all leg lock guys, and I did do quite well with leg locks. So that's obviously the no gi aspect more than the gi. So I would say I'm kind of 50-50. I know I gave you a long-winded answer, but
no, that's perfect, man. It's all good. No worries, man.
So
yeah. You definitely have, like, at least from the guys that I've gotten to interview, you guys have like a very interesting bunch over at Gentleman's. It's a lot of different characters. I'll have to say that.
Yeah, I mean, I am, like I said, I'm a walking comic book. I'm a cartoon. I like to make people laugh, and I'm a little weird. I was weird before the concussions. They've only just made it more awesome.
I know how you feel. Hey,
Yeah.
you can't smell bread. It's okay, dude. Sometimes you forget your colors. It's perfectly fine. It's all good.
Nah. It's just I just slur a little bit as it gets later in the day, but that's okay. I could just pretend like I'm drunk. I own 6 pairs of Zubas pants. Anyone will believe it.
So let's get back. Let's get into the comic book stuff because I couldn't make out fully what your tattoos are on your chest except for Spider-Man in the middle. Who are the two on top?
Oh, that's actually not Spider-Man. It's because it's got a lot of infill. It kind of bleeds into it. So it's actually a swimmer, a biker, and a runner. So because I used to do triathlons, like I did a half Ironman about 10 years ago.
Oh, okay, I'm about to get a whole lot of shit because I called your biker a Spider-Man. So I'm preparing for that now. But okay, yeah, because I saw the three right there on your chest, and I was like, okay, that's different. He's got a story behind that. But yeah, so you were a triathlon athlete,
Yeah,
right?
I that's another funny story where it was like I shamed myself into it. So one day I was just sitting, this was before I got into jujitsu and all that. I played ice hockey when I was younger. I ran a lot in college and lifted weights like a normal, guy who just went to the gym, nothing fancy. And as I think I was already divorced, but I was just hanging out in my house or my condo. I was medium pimping. I didn't have a house, I had a condo. So I was watching TV, eating Doritos with dip. Some people are going to think that's heresy, but that's what I was doing. Sitting there watching, just flipping through the channels, and the Ironman World Championships was on. And I was like, oh, I've never seen this. Let me take a look at it. And they, produce it to the people that are at the front, but they really focus on the people with disabilities who do it. And I'm sitting there eating like a fat slob, sitting on the couch, doing nothing. I wasn't in that bad a shape, but I clearly wasn't doing anything. And there was nothing really wrong with me that I couldn't do more. And I'm sitting there going, man, this stuff's too hard. I couldn't do it. And then they show a guy. I don't know if you're familiar with the name Team Hoyt. It was a older guy and his disabled son doing an Ironman, which is a 140-mile triathlon, pushing his son in a wheelchair,
I know who
pulling
you're
him
talking
in a
about now.
boat.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about now. Yep.
So I almost had this moment where I'm like sitting there with the chip coming into my mouth, going, oh man, this is so hard. I could never do that. And then seeing a guy like moving two bodies, like, okay, well, he's probably not eating Doritos. So I was like, well, there's no reason why I can't do this. So I started swimming, which I did the way I used to do running, where I was like, I'm just going to go for it and I'll be fine. And swimming is the worst thing you can do to yourself if you don't build up.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't been in a pool in like 13 years. I couldn't move the next day. So I started training for triathlons, and that kind of that was just something I did. And then not much longer, I think 6 months later, I started doing jujitsu, kickboxing, and judo. So it all kind of culminated, and I beat up my body for 10 years doing all that stuff.
So it sounds like there wasn't really like a "ooh, this is cool" moment. It was more like a "I wonder how that is," or "I wonder how to get into that kind of moment." Not really like you saw something unique and you were like, "Okay, I can do that." It was more of a "I can't do that. I'm gonna get myself to do that."
Yeah, I mean, I've always done one of my early instructors, Rob Mudrak, who ran Next Gen MMA in New Jersey, which doesn't exist anymore. Um, he was somebody who had a background in training in psychology, which I think is as an instructor, a coach, a teacher, you should kind of have a bit of that, at least understanding of it. And he was just better at it than I was. He just was more in-depth student of it. Um, and the way you inspire people and get them to do things is to understand their mentality and what drives them. So the way that I can kind of look at it is you hear a lot of fighters and a lot of fighters do well with being challenged, and that's where you see kind of in the early stages of the movie Rocky, for instance, he's just shitting all over him, just like treating him like a dog. And it's because a lot of fighters, they come from the street. When you challenge them like that, it brings out the beast in them, and then you just have to kind of control that. And my first instructor, Rob, he was the kind of guy that would figure out what you were and who you were and what brought things out of you. He would be the guy that would sit down and be like, "Hey man, you're just not trying hard enough, or you're not doing well." And that's what he would do to some people. Other times you'd motivate them, build them up positively, like, "You got this, you're doing great, just keep going." Because if you went the other way, they would just fold and quit. So I was just naturally a guy that if I was told, even by myself, "Ooh, you can't do that," and then show that somebody else who had a harder time getting there could do it, I would then subconsciously guilt myself into, like, so the guy with no legs is still going and competing in jiu-jitsu, and you are sitting on the couch complaining about how hard it is and how your ankle hurts. I'm willing to bet that guy wants his ankle to hurt, but it's not there anymore. So stop being a little bitch. And nobody says these things to me. Like, it's just in my head, like, really? We're going to sit here like this?
Yeah.
Oh, I'd love to do that, but it's hard. I bet it was harder for that guy. Oh, okay. I'll stop being a little bitch about it.
You could say either word, it's fine.
Right.
Yeah, I've never. Okay, yeah, that was definitely. I can see, like, probably academically, that's just what drove you to become, like, an engineer and achieve everything that you got to. It's a very interesting motivation you have in your head. It's just guilt tripping you into succeeding, which works out.
Yeah,
in a way.
I mean, I'm a little crazy. Like, so is my brother, and we attribute a lot of that to my dad. He was kind of a nut job. So like, I kind of like succeeded in life, kind of like to spite him. If I want to look back at when I was like 18, when I was an angry little jackass who didn't understand what the world was, there was a lot of times where I wanted to quit. And in my mind, it was like, well, I have to do better than my dad because he's an asshole and I can't have him be better than me. I mean, it's the way a 16-year-old or an 18-year-old would think. And it just kind of became my personality. I didn't need him to be the crutch. It was just like, this is a challenge. You can't rise to it. Like, to finish college, I slept in my car for a month or two. Because I needed to, and then I had a gym membership. I'd shower there. I had a job. I worked at a construction site. I had food in the fridge there. Like, I figured it all out. And it's like, you lived off of $12 a day, and now something's difficult and you can't get through it. Come on, man, this is bullshit. You got this.
I like that mentality, and I hope a lot of people can see the good side to having a mentality like that, especially with like I said, with what you've been able to accomplish. Now you're a teacher, you may compete later in the future. It's really up in the air. One last thing I want to ask you before I end the interview, and do you watch the current product of wrestling or no?
I don't watch it religiously like I did back in the Monday Night Wars. It was better when I was 16 and I didn't have adult responsibilities, so that made everything easy. Like, I kind of like shaped my life around, hey, Thunder's on Thursday, Monday Night Raw. Oh, but we got to watch Nitro first because it comes on an hour earlier. Then switch over to Raw because that's a better show. So I had like my whole schedule figured out. Now it's like I sometimes watch the pay-per-views. I try to catch them, but I can tell you that, like, I start turning into an old man watching wrestling very quickly. Like, right when they had I understand it's a business, but like when they had the Prime bottle on the ring, I don't know why it pissed me off so much. And it's like, it doesn't change anything, but it's like, it's kind of a sellout move. But, one of the things I've complained about a lot too is during the pay-per-views, like they have the wrestlers essentially doing, advertisements for the sponsors. Like when they had the Mountain Dew blackout match a year or two ago, like
Yeah.
this stuff is just like, I'm all for like a terrible gimmick match. Like when they did that Chamber of Horrors one at the Halloween Havoc where they put Abdullah the Butcher in an electric chair and threw the switch. So I'm okay with being ridiculous and suspending belief.
Yes.
But like to make it like an advertisement, it just made me like I was doing a lot of this.
So when it's over the top, you're good. But when you have Rocket Money in your face and on the apron and on the ring, you're like, no, I can't do this.
Yeah, that's probably Dana White's fault, because that left a bad taste in my mouth when they made such a big deal about the fighters having sponsors and looking like a NASCAR driver or the Yellow Pages. And then what did they do? They made the Octagon look like the Yellow Pages.
Yes.
And it's like, I could understand if they were getting like, Mike Tyson or Floyd Mayweather or NFL's quarterback money. And it's like, do you really need that? Like, okay, fine. But, these were guys that a lot of them were making $1,500 to show, $1,500 to win. And then with their sponsors, because they were on a pay-per-view, they could get like 40 grand out of it.
Yeah.
And now it's like, oh yeah, we're going to, Reebok, who won't spell your name right and show the wrong country. And oh, by the way, you get $500 more because we made this deal that puts $3 million in our pocket. So
you and Rampage Jackson just need to have a conversation, because I would love to just be a fly on the wall there and just hear what y'all think about sponsors in the UFC. But as we begin to wind down, where can people contact you if they want to start their jiu-jitsu journey? And what is the name again of I don't want to call it a dojo, the academy that you teach at?
You could just call it the club, because I always make that joke. It's Gentlemen's MMA and Jiu-Jitsu, but I always say like, it's at the Gentlemen's Club. And usually the wives of my friends get really upset. But yeah, it's Gentlemen's MMA and Jiu-Jitsu in Wilmington, Delaware. That's where I teach the basics class on Tuesdays and Thursdays. It's also where I get my instruction. I've been friends for like 14, 15 years with the owner, who is also still on the mats every day, teaching, training. He's been my buddy for a long time. And I have nothing but respect for him. I guess technically we're both black belts, so we're peers, but I think his understanding of the art form is way beyond mine. So that's where you'll find me honing my craft and learning what I need.
Okay. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you yet again for coming on this show. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys took a lot out of just, you guys can achieve anything if you guys just put your mind to it, or you guilt yourself into it and then you just become really fucking good at it. And I will see each and every one of you in the next video.